Could Parmenides, the great pre-Socratic philosopher of the 6th or 5th century BC, have been the father of non-duality in the West? This is precisely what I seek to demonstrate today. That is, that indeed he was. While we ordinarily think of the non-dual teaching as coming out of the Indus Valley in India and as being beautifully expressed in the Upanishads, isn't it amazing that we can also find the essence of that teaching in classical Greek philosophy? Today I turn to his poem on truth or on nature or on reality, and in particular to the translation recently made by the contemporary teacher of Advaita Vedanta named Francis Lucille. Now, the first part I won't be reading. It has to do with the allegorical poem in which Parmenides travels to meet the goddess who will then impart the teaching to him. In part 2, we have the teaching on the nature of being. And in part 3, which I also will not discuss, we hear in a fragmentary form about the way of opinion, or the way of Maya, we might say. I especially like Francis Lucille's interpretation or translation because of its philosophical clarity and rigor. Without further ado, I'll read parts of the poem, parts of part 2, and then discuss it with you. It begins in part 2. Now then, says the goddess, I will instruct you. Hear what I say. 2 paths are open to investigation. The first says being is and non-being is not. It is a path of certainty because it follows the truth. The other says being is not, therefore non-being is. This misdirected path, I tell you, cannot lead to a sound conviction. For if this statement were true, it would not be possible for you to conceive of non-being, nor to name it. The poem goes on. Speaking and thinking necessarily arise from being because being is, and non-being is not. I invite you to reflect deeply on this point and to move away in your search from that other path, way of opinion, as from the one traveled by those ignorant mortals who are the men of 2 minds. The uncertainty which resides in their hearts misleads their wavering reason. Skipping ahead. Only one path, the way of truth, remains for us to pursue. Being is. And countless signs prove that being is free from birth and death, because it is complete, immutable, and eternal. It never was, it never will be, because it is completely whole, in the now, one, endless. What beginning indeed should we attribute to it? Whence would it evolve? Whither? I will not allow you to say or to think that it comes from nothingness or non-being, nor that being is not. What exigency would have brought it forth later or earlier from non-being? Thus, it concludes, it can only be absolutely or not at all. All right. Perhaps you think that was just philosophical mumbo jumbo, but let's make really good sense of it now. Because right there, perhaps, was disclosed the very nature of being or reality. And my discussion, which will be quite succinct, and then I'll turn to a parting question, I'm going to try to parse this text in terms of 6 propositions. It's all contained, actually, the pith is contained completely in the statement being is and non-being is not. But for the purposes of our discussion, I'll flesh that proposition out. The first one, as stated, being is, non-being is not. How do we bring the meaning out? The second proposition, stated right there in the text. Well, then, that means that being is complete, immutable, eternal. And that means, proposition 3, that being simply cannot come into being, nor can being go out of being or cease to be. More poetically put, being is birthless and deathless. That is the teaching, though it would require a deep experiential investigation, often known as meditation, to realize the truth of this understanding. But for our purposes, let's turn to what non-being, that is the part that's ruled out, what non-being is not, signifies. So I come to the 4th proposition. Non-being, or no-thingness, cannot come into being. And so it can't possibly go out of being. 5th, non-being simply cannot be, or in some rendition here, could be cannot be experienced. 6th, non-being can be neither conceived, that is thought. You really can't even think non-being, nor can it be named, Sanskrit being nama. It has no actual name because there's nothing to which such a name would refer. In sum, non-being, just because it is unreal, makes no sense. It is strictly nonsensical. How is that non-duality? Non-duality says that there are not 2 realities. So you might infer that there's only one basic reality. But it doesn't actually say that there's one countable reality either, because reality or being is not countable. So it wouldn't even say that there's one reality, perhaps. It would only say that there is reality. But when it says there is reality, it's also just saying that being is. But if only being is, then how can it not be? And how can it come into being? And how can it go out of being? Those are impossible. That's the essence of what is realized in Zen and Chan and philosophical Taoism and Advaita Vedanta, and indeed right here at the very heart of pre-Socratic philosophy, at least in the hands of Parmenides. I leave you with a question, a koan, a puzzle. an enigma. And I think I'm borrowing it from Bernardo Castro, the contemporary philosopher living in Europe. I believe he asks the following sometimes. How come you've never experienced your own death? How come, or why is it that you can't experience your own death? Only, it seems, it seems, the deaths of others. If it turned out that you actually could not experience your own death, that could be because only being is. And if only being truly is, then there actually and fundamentally is no birth and no death. You might imagine birth and you might imagine death. But those imaginations could, in a sense, be regarded as illusion.